We're going to start off by doing a little bit of a recap, and I'll just have you turn to the person next to you. What stood out to you if you were here? So maybe it was an idea that stood out, maybe it was just something that you're like, oh, I never really thought about the author, or the, sort of the overall picture. Maybe you're just like, you know what, I've gone through Ecclesiastes before, and I don't know. And then think about which one of these themes or words resonates with you. All right, go. If you are at the point where you're like, hey, I'm glad that we had this conversation, that's great, but I actually wasn't here for that themes discussion. I kind of would like to know all of that background stuff. The former session was recorded, it's on YouTube. I haven't gotten it to the website yet, but we'll send out an email to everybody who's in this class or who was in this class every week to say, hey, here's the recording from last week. In case you're wondering, I do edit the videos, so anything where you guys are talking, I cut out. So anything that's recorded that you're like, well, I don't want to be on YouTube, you're not. So if you want to be on YouTube, just come up and stand next to me, and then you'll be on YouTube. Otherwise, I do edit those out so that it's just me blathering on about Ecclesiastes. If you ever do want to see the sessions, that's where they'll be. So we have all of these themes from Ecclesiastes, and we're going to start right in talking about all of this Hebel stuff, all of this stuff under the sun. I'm going to start us off by introducing my dog Misty. So this is Misty. She is about 8.5, maybe 9 months old. We don't know exactly how old she is because we got her as a stray puppy. And she is, though, about the size of a miniature pony. And so I'm expecting someday soon to be able to ride her into class. She's not exaggerating. It'll be very fun and exciting. And one of the great things about having Misty is that she really likes to sit on our furniture, and we are too soft-hearted to tell her no. And so no matter what piece of furniture we have, and notice, I would like to point out that we have a very nice dog bed. We do. We have a dog bed for her, which she occasionally decides, okay, I'll go ahead and use it. But most of the time, she likes to sit up on our couches and our chair. And you may notice that I have this blanket artfully arranged over the top of the chair, but it's not quite there anymore because every time that Misty gets up on any piece of furniture, she does that sort of like, I'm going to make myself a little nest thing, and so she digs it off and sort of arranges it, and I'm like, I just fixed that 20 seconds ago, dog! But it's a fruitless effort because no matter how many times I fix the blanket, inevitably, Misty's there to clamber back up and sort of pull it right on down again. And that's sort of the idea that we get from the first section in Ecclesiastes Chapter 1. We see all these elements of things from nature, things from people's lives, the things that we just keep doing over and over and over again, and they don't seem to have any lasting impact. And so we're going to start off by looking at the poem, the Cycles poem, and then we're going to look at Kohelet's first reflective speech in Chapter 1. So first of all, the overall structure of Chapter 1, again, we already talked about the introduction to the book. We saw, hey, this is Kohelet, this is the king, the son of David, king in Jerusalem, and then he presents the thesis of the book in the form of a question. Now, this is the thing that I always tell my students, hey, don't do that, don't do this, because whenever you're writing classes, Meg, go ahead, grab that hand out there. You got. She's on it. She was like, I saw her head go down. I was like, I didn't need to open my mouth. Whenever I teach writing classes, I'm teaching a specific genre of writing, and I say, look, your thesis statement needs to be at the end of your introduction. Where does it need to be? At the end of your introduction, and then inevitably it's like 3 paragraphs down. I'm like, is this your thesis statement? And I'm saying, hey, you have to summarize your overall argument and make it nice and clear. But here, Kohelet does it in the form of a question. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second. Verses 4 through 11 is the Cycles poem, and we'll dive into how that breaks down as well. And he ends again with that autobiographical reflective speech. Now, we're only doing Chapter 1 today because that's quite sufficient, but I want you to just recognize that this is not a full section. So the full section is going to go down to the end of Chapter 2. So you're going to see at the end, we're going to finish, and you're not going to feel fully satisfied because you're like, I feel like we just sort of started something, and that's correct. However, we can't cover quite that much all in one day because we'll run out of time. So we're gonna slide over into chapter 1. Now, what I have over here, I like to do look at the passage itself and sort of split it up. If you, whenever I post this to the website, the PowerPoints will be listed there as well. So if you ever want to look at those, that's there. I like to highlight things in the same color, so you'll see all throughout the study that I have Hebel highlighted blue. It's going to be highlighted the same throughout the entire thing. This just helps me to track themes, helps me to track ideas, helps me to see where do sections end, where do new sections begin, and it really helps you to track the flow of the book. So we have him saying, hey, Hebel, Hebelim, says Kohelet, all is Hebel. Remember that we talked about how Hebel has that range of meanings. We have the idea of transience, that something is here and then it's gone. It's brief. We have the idea of vanity, and vanity even itself is a very packed word. So we have that there's no lasting impact. There's not meaning there. It's just sort of empty. We have the meaning of irony, where you say, hey, that's not quite the way that I thought it should be. This is hard to understand, or enigmatic. And then the last meaning that we talked about is frustration, where we sort of look at life and we say, this is actually frustrating. This is repugnant. This is foul. And all of those meanings are sort of captured here at the beginning, and we're going to see paired at the end as well in verse 8 of chapter 12, that those two times, because they're sort of summary, all of those meanings can be encapsulated in this use of Hebel. Now, in our Cycles poem today, we're going to focus in on the second meaning of vanity. I know I'm not very good at like a sort of, all right, we're going to leave suspense. No, there's no suspense. We're going to focus in on the meaning of vanity. So, verse 3, what does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? Again, this is his thesis, and he's asking the question, what is the gain? And if you remember from last week, gain is the Hebrew word yitron, and we get this idea of lasting profit. And so Kohelet is starting to ask the question. He's looking out over all of the effort that we do, and he's saying, hey, what is the long-term benefit that we get out of all of this? Hey, Becca, go ahead and grab the handout, which you can add to your book then. So what is the lasting profit? What do I get out of all of this stuff that I'm spending all of this time on? You may think about it this way: what's in it for me? And again, this question, have you guys ever seen or heard of the movie Inception? Yes. Whoa, that was a lot. I was like, I'm gonna have to explain it. This is terrible. And so in Inception, this one guy, there's this whole backstory, but essentially these two characters having a conversation, and the one guy says, oh, so he's gonna give himself the idea. And the other guy says, precisely, that's the only way to make it stick. It has to seem self-generated. And that's the nice thing about questions, is that it allows us as the audience to sort of come alongside Kohelet in this process of discovery, where he's not just coming and saying, look, this is how life is, but he's saying, think about it with me. Think about it with me. And remember, we talked about how there's really a threefold aspect to the purpose of Ecclesiastes, and one of them is for us to be able to acknowledge the Hebelness of life. And so Kohelet is starting off and trying to get us to see what he is seeing, saying, what do we really gain out of life? We also see in this verse the word toil. Remember, that's another one of our key words that shows up a lot in Ecclesiastes, the word amal. And what's interesting about this word is that it's not just, okay, I'm going to work, I'm going to get this stuff done, but it's really thinking about the drudgery and a lot of the more unpleasant aspects of work. Now, again, it's not always bad, but it often emphasizes those unpleasant elements. And then we have this key phrase, under the sun. Remember, this phrase, under the sun, refers to a horizontal, limited perspective. Really, it has this idea of, from what I can see and reason out in the here and now. He's not a sinful perspective. It's not like he's saying, I'm going to take God and just throw him out the window. But he's saying, hey, I'm looking out, and this is what I see. This is just what I observe. This is what I can tell about life from my perspective as a limited human being. And that's important to keep in mind as we're going through and as we're seeing sort of his initial conclusions here as well. That it's a under the sun perspective. Let's read verses 4 through 7. This is really the poem really beginning here. So a generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. And I think you can even hear and feel, as long with seeing, all of this repetition, all of this sort of emphasis of nature just sort of does its thing. And it does its thing over and over and over and over again. It's not like the sun gets up one morning and says, guys, we did it! The perfect sunrise! We can high fives, everybody! You guys have seen Elf, right? You guys know Elf, so it's like Buddy the Elf who's like, you did it! The best cup of coffee! The world's best cup of coffee! We did it! You've reached the height. The sun doesn't do that. It doesn't say we've done our job, now we're done. What does it do? It rises again. Whenever the streams flow into the sea, it's not like the sea fills up and it's like, all right, guys, cut it off, no more water. We don't need any more water. No, it evaporates and, goes and sort of trickles into the earth. It feeds the crops, whatever. And it keeps going. Same thing with the wind. And so we get this initial picture so Kohelet looks out at nature and he says, so from the natural world, I see that life is Hebel. And in this case, he's really thinking about that there's no lasting impact. Nature toils, and what does it get from it? Which is nothing. Like, it doesn't do it. It doesn't actually benefit nature at all to keep it just sort of keeps on rolling. It keeps on doing its thing. Now what's interesting though is that as you look at it, is this necessarily negative? Like, does this sound like bad? No, it's just nature doing its thing, but there isn't a lasting impact, which is, again, part of what Kohelet is starting to dive into, saying, hey, what's the long-term benefit here? He's looking out at life, and nature is telling him, okay, here's your first sort of clue, here's your first step in the process, that there doesn't seem to be any lasting impact, at least while we're looking out at nature. There's no lasting impact. Now I'm going to take a look at the next verse here. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. Now, the Hebrew here is tricky. It's weird. But the word things can both mean things, like all of the things, and it can mean words. And so this can be interpreted to mean, hey, all of the speaking, all of the seeing, and all of the hearing, all of these things all together are never quite filled up. Now, there's this common trope out there about husbands who are aggravated that their wives talk, right? And they're like, okay, look, I've hit my limit. You've said quite enough. No more talking. You run out of all of your words. You've used them all. I'm done. I've had enough hearing. You should be done with your talking. Now, I personally don't experience that right now, possibly because my husband's really nice, or just because he's really good at fooling me into thinking that yes, keep on talking, keep on going. But that's a trope that's out there. But we experience this all throughout life, right? So, okay, you finally had that conversation where everybody was upfront and honest about what they really want for dinner. And you guys, it was glorious, perfect communication was achieved, you went out for dinner. Now, you're done communicating, right? You've had the perfect interaction. Not quite. Or, you saw the most glorious sunset and you're like, oh my word, my eyes are satisfied. I do not need to look at anything else.
Nope.
No, you get excited, like, oh my gosh, I can go and see X, Y, or Z. Your child said to you, Mom, I just really love you. You're like, oh. And then they have a Tasmanian devil tantrum later, and you're like, oh my goodness! And you're wondering, am I really making a difference or not? Even though they said something and you heard it, your ears are not satisfied with hearing. And so all of these things, we're never quite satisfied. We're never done. It's not like we get to a point where we have finished seeing, we've finished hearing, we've finished whatever. It's just another piece of evidence that Kohelet is gathering in his argument that what he sees in life is Hebel, that there is not a lasting impact. All of these common human activities that we see, we have to keep doing them over and over again. Next set of verses 9 through 11, and that does not show up well at all. Mental note. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has been already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. Now, verse 9's proclamation has always really resonated with me. So, I say kind of frequently, hey, there's nothing new under the sun. But inevitably, there's always some smart alecky college kid who's nearby who's like, well, what about the iPhone? They didn't have that. I'm like, yeah, yes, okay, yes, that's true. However, the impact of these verses is that there's no new patterns of life. There's nothing new that, like, oh my goodness, this is going to radically change how humanity does things. People are still going to give birth. They're still going to work. They're still going to die. There's nothing new that we've been able to achieve that changes how we go about life. We're still working. We're still getting treatment for medicine. We're still, if you're looking for Jeff, I think he's in the cafeteria. There are no new human patterns of existence. Now, we're also seeing the Kohelet highlight that there's no enduring memory. Now, again, that might be something where you say, well, perhaps that may have been true in ancient days, but it's not so true anymore. I mean, we still know about George Washington. That's right. And that's true. And Kohelet isn't saying that nothing lasts. After all, he is writing this thing, anticipating that, there's somebody's going to read it at some point. So it's a slight exaggeration. But if you think about it in our day-to-day lives, we have conversations with people. We pass on knowledge. Maybe your grandmother's recipe, your favorite, I don't know, buttered bread. That was really lame. I don't know. I want buttered bread. So I'm like, I just really want some warm bread. So I don't know, that would work for me. The perfect pie crust, I don't know. And so there are some things that get passed down. But if you think far back enough, then what do you know about your great-great-great-grandparents? What do you know about their lives? About what they enjoyed, what they relished? You may have one recipe, but what about all the others that they used? It's a fact of life that if you go long enough, eventually, we're going to be forgotten. And so Kohelet says, there's no enduring memory. Even if you think of beyond the personal to sort of abstract, Winston Churchill and others have said something along the lines of, those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And unfortunately, we see often enough that perhaps it doesn't repeat exactly, but the saying, history rhymes, right? So we seem to do the same sorts of mistakes over and over and over again throughout human history. We never quite learn from things that have gone before. And if you don't quite believe me, nothing will convert you faster than 2 minutes on TikTok. One new trend that has been discovered on TikTok is silent walking. Turns out it's really good for your mental health. Crazy, walking outside without your devices in God's beautiful creation. It's restorative. Oh my goodness, it's revolutionary. But they're just discovering it because there's no remembrance of the former things. There's no remembrance. And it's only going to get worse as the generations go forward. Kohelet's already observing this, thousands of years ago. So all is Hebel. There's nothing lasting. There's no enduring memory. Ultimately, the end of the poem says, hey, there doesn't seem to be in these various areas any lasting impact. And so this is a little bit depressing. You're all looking at me and saying, I didn't quite get that. It was going to be quite that depressing in week 1. I think you've deceived us all. Hold on, we will get out of a little bit of depression, but this is the initial conclusion that Kohelet is going to proclaim in the next set of verses, that there is no lasting impact. And as we do move from this subsection to the new subsection, I do want to highlight that it is a shift and some things that we can note that help us to see, oh, this is something different. We've gone from one thing to another thing. There's a change of voice. He was talking in the third person voice, just sort of describing what was going on. And now we have a shift to first person. I, Kohelet, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem. We also have a change of topic. So we have this description of nature's cycles, and then we move to a description of a personal quest. And he says, hey, this is what I am doing. I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that's under heaven. And we have a change of genre, and I think you could hear, even while I was talking, sort of the cadence, the rhythm to the words. Again, that repetition. The first section was poetry. And now this new section that we're looking at is an autobiographical speech. He's reflecting. He's telling us, hey, this is what I'm doing. I see people writing, so I'm going to take advantage of that to take a sip of my coffee. We're going to do it. All right, let's read verses 12 and 13. I, Kohelet, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. Now, the term in Hebrew, so some of your translations may say had been king. I, Kohelet, had been king over Israel in Jerusalem. Either can be appropriate, I have been king or I had been king. As we talked about last week, it doesn't really make sense for us to think about Kohelet as like a deposed King Solomon, like, hey, I was king, but I'm not king anymore. As we talked about, in American culture, our government changes hands, perhaps not quite as readily as we would like to, but it does change hands relatively regularly and relatively peacefully. Fingers crossed. But so, about every 2 years, we have new people in office, and it's fairly benign. In this day and age, that didn't happen. Power changed hands whenever the old king died, either because he was old or because somebody else was like, I'm tired of you being king. I want to be king now. I'm going to kill you. And so there was no, I had been king and now I am king. And so it's one of the things that makes people sort of question, was it really Solomon? Was it not? However, as we've talked about again, you can say, hey, I have been king, as though I started being king and I have continued to be king. So I have been king. Like, I've been teaching at LBC. So it's not that I finished teaching at LBC, but that I'm a teacher at LBC. It started sometime in the past. So that is a way to understand the Hebrew in these verses. And so he's just saying, hey, I've been reigning in Jerusalem. And so as we talked about, it could be Solomon writing about, hey, this is what has happened in the course of my reign, or I'm writing in the persona of Solomon. Either's possible. Not gonna. There's a phrase. We're not gonna die on this hill. And I was like, you're not gonna break any eggs about it? That is absolutely not the phrase, and I have no idea where that came from. It's just waiting for the right phrase to come. So he says, I applied my heart. Now, when we think about heart, what do we think of? What term comes to mind? I say, with all my heart, it's emotions. It's all about our emotions. That's not how the Hebrews use the word heart. What this phrase really means, he set his mind in focus. So he decided, again, we talked about a quest. He has determined to seek and to search out by wisdom all of these things. He's going to take it to task. He's looking into it, what exactly is going on here. Now, we also have right here wisdom. And wisdom is something that shows up throughout all of Scripture, especially in the wisdom literature, so Proverbs, Psalms. A short definition of wisdom that I like to use is living skillfully in light of the fear of the Lord. It's not just knowledge. Knowledge is you can look at something, you've gained some sort of understanding that's theoretical, and wisdom is being able to take that knowledge and apply it cleverly to life. You can have a secular kind of wisdom where you can skillfully navigate a set of circumstances, but anytime in Scripture that the word wisdom is used in this way, it really does begin with the fear of the Lord. And we have a whole bunch of Psalms and Proverbs that say, hey, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, or it's the beginning of wisdom. And so whenever we think about wisdom in this context, in this case, we're seeing both that wisdom is a tool that Kohelet uses. So again, everything that he's going to look at, he's doing with the tool of wisdom. It's by his side. He's saying, I'm not just sort of randomly, this is very important as we go into chapter 2, I'm not just indulging in all of this stuff just to see what can I get out of life. It's an experiment. It's a test. He's saying, okay, what can I gain? What is the lasting profit from these things that I'm going to experiment with? So he's going about this with wisdom. But we're also going to see, especially in the second half, although we're going to see some initial results in the first half as well, that wisdom itself is a subject of testing. And he's going to see, hey, what good is wisdom? What profit does it gain me to go about life with wisdom? And we're going to see some interesting results. He's going to ultimately conclude that wisdom doesn't quite get you all the way there, but it's better to live with wisdom than without wisdom. So just take that and put it in your back pocket. Note too that the phrase under heaven is basically used in the same way that under the sun is used. So whenever you see under heaven, this is much rarer than the phrase under the sun, but it essentially means the same thing. It said, hey, horizontal, I'm a limited person, but this is what I see. This is the perspective that he's looking at. He goes on, it is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is Hebel, and is striving after wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. Now, to this context that sometimes going about it in English is a little bit unfortunate. Again, we see this word inyan being used for business. Inyan is one of those key words that we're going to see popping up over and over again throughout Ecclesiastes. And it's the occupation. What are you doing under the sun? So what is the thing that's occupying your time and attention? Interestingly, the word unhappy is not really a good translation for the word. It's actually evil. This is an evil business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. And even further, the phrase busy with, you think, oh, it's probably closely related to the word business, right? Because it's basically the same thing in English. No, it actually needs to be afflicted with. So it is an evil business that God has given to the children of man to be afflicted with. Yikes. That comes across pretty harsh. So this initial evaluation, Kohelet is saying, I've seen what people can do, and this is a preview. We haven't seen the end of the story yet. He's going to go forward and he's going to say, hey, here's additional evidence that I have collected. But he's giving us up front what he has found. And so again, this is, there are several ways that you can write an argumentative essay. Sometimes you start off with the conclusion right up at the front. Sometimes you sort of lead them along by the nose and say, can you? I don't know, can you figure it out? Here's one piece of evidence. Oh, here's another piece of it. Oh, you can see which way I'm leaning my hand now. He doesn't do that. He says right off the bat, this is what I found, and then he's going to go on to give additional evidence for it. That it seems like there is something wretched about the state that humanity is in, that God, and he attributes it directly to God. He says, hey, God has given this to us. It's not just the result of evolution or anything like that. He doesn't even say, I'm just going to leave God out of it. Maybe it's from God, maybe it's not. No, he says, hey, God has done this to us. And we're going to see throughout Ecclesiastes hints as to why God may allow us to be in such a state where what we do here on earth doesn't always seem to, it doesn't always seem to have that lasting impact. But we do have an additional advantage because we have the New Testament. So we're going to be able to bring in some additional eternal perspectives. But what Kohelet is saying right off the bat is, this doesn't seem to look very good. Now, briefly, I forgot. The word strive means to desire or to shepherd. So, striving after wind. I was like, where's the word strive in this verse? What am I doing? So, striving after wind. So, again, it can mean to desire or to shepherd. We talked about grasping after the wind, trying to catch the wind. I like the term to shepherd as well, though, because it has that element of control. And we, perhaps as women especially, like to control elements of our life. We like to feel like we have the ability to make things make sense, to have our ducks in a row. We know where we're going. We sort of know the outcome, the different things that we do are going to have long term. But Kohelet, again, is saying, hey, there isn't that ability. We don't have the ability long term to be able to grasp that which we're seeking after and to be able to control life the way that we want to. It eludes us. Now, this phrase, what is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted, is a proverbial saying that sort of summarizes these thoughts. And it again has the idea of God is the one who did it. So if you think, well, God made it crooked, can you straighten it? No. And if something is lacking, can you count it? So if I count the M&Ms and you're like, what M&Ms? You can't count them. And so we're seeing how Kohelet, again, is looking at life, and it's an initial conclusion. So we're going to see this explored more thoroughly. But he's saying, I looked out at life, and I'm seeing that through our human effort and through our efforts, we can't always figure out everything. Our effort cannot find the end result of every matter. Some answers aren't there for us to find. Some results are not there for us to claim, no matter how much we try, no matter how wise we are, no matter how much effort we put into it. And he concludes that is pointless. And I think you can also say that there's some frustration in there as well, that he feels frustrating. He says, this is Hebel. This is a frustrating thing that I see, that no matter how much effort, creation, that human efforts are pouring into the world, that there's no lasting impact, and it seems to be a hopeless chase. And we're not quite at the end, but we are almost there. Verse 16. I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who are over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is but a striving after wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Again, we have that phrase, surpassing all who are over Jerusalem before me, which we pointed out last week is another thing that makes people question, was Solomon the one who wrote it, or was it somebody writing in the guise of Solomon, saying, hey, I'm a really wise dude like Solomon, but I've gathered up all this wisdom. Or it could just be the sort of language that people would use to have exaggeration. Either's possible, either's very possible. And he says, hey, I had wisdom, and I've explored madness and folly. This is a particular type of literary device known as a merism. And it's saying, hey, to the most wise, to the greatest folly, I've looked at it all, everything in between these two extremes, and I've seen it all, and I've seen, okay, out of all of this, it's all striving after the wind. It doesn't give you any of that lasting gain. Nothing quite at the end there.
Mariah, can you explain your second bullet? Is that wisdom too?
So it's a parallel line, so paralleled with madness and folly. Yeah. Sometimes I use things that only make sense to my brain.
No, it makes sense. I just needed context.
Yeah. And again, he reaches this initial conclusion then, our best wisdom still results in pain and frustration and does not allow us the control that we desire. And that's sort of the explanation of verses 17 and 18. In much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Sometimes knowing more doesn't end up in our gain. Sometimes the more that we find out, honestly, the more depressing life gets, and sometimes even too, it doesn't matter how wisely we approach a situation, it still ends up with pain. It still ends up with frustration, and it kind of stinks. You're like, man, I could be the wisest person in the world and go about life in the best way possible, and sometimes it actually goes against me. Like, I thought I was doing a good thing here, and it ended up being countereffective. That's crummy. So as we close out the chapter, note that again, the end of the chapter does not equal the end of this section. Kohelet is going to wrap these things up toward the end of chapter 2, and he's going to come to a happier landing spot. We're not landing there today because it's already almost the end of class, so aren't you glad we didn't tackle the entire thing? Remember too, though, that he's looking at under the sun realities. He's looking at things from a horizontal perspective. Like I talked about with Misty's chair, there are lots of things in life that we do over and over and over again. Make food, clean the floor, clean the bathroom, put oil in the car, whatever, that you're like, I just have to do it. I just have to do it over and over and over again, and it doesn't seem like there's any lasting impact because I have to keep doing it. And so this is a reality that Kohelet is describing, and he's saying this is frustrating, and it doesn't seem like there's any lasting impact from it. And that's something that I can resonate with. I'm like, I look out in my life, and there's lots of stuff that grading. Oh my gosh, I got back in grading this week, and I was like, I can't do it. So there's lots of things in life that are similar, that we just have to do them over and over again. Now, it is important for us as New Testament believers to be able to pull in our New Testament perspective, because Kohelet is looking at things under the sun, and he's going to pull in a vertical perspective as well, but for us, we have an additional perspective because we do have additional revelation. And so passages like Romans 8, verses 18 through 25, which says, for I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and to obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. And you even saw in that verse the futility, which is what Kohelet is describing. And so even the New Testament acknowledges that there's a lot of stuff that has not been rectified fully because Christ has not returned yet. He's not set all things right. 2 Corinthians 4:16 through 18 also helps us to sort of think through, okay, the things that are seen are transient. We have this hope that is in the future. It's that eternal weight of glory. These things that we're going through on a day-to-day basis, those are light and momentary afflictions. And so we have that hope that even though the things that we do may burden us, and we may feel frustrated that I can't believe that my kid just spilled cereal all over the floor again, I just cleaned it up. But that we have a glory that's awaiting us. And so we acknowledge that our efforts may look like they haven't turned out, but because of what Jesus has done on the cross, and because of the future hope that we have, that because of that life after the grave, we have the opportunity to impact eternity with every action. It's because of Christ. It's not because of just, what we've done, but because of Christ, every small thing that we do has the opportunity to ripple out into eternity. And so I think that it's important for us to hold on to both of these things, to recognize that, all right, you know what? Yeah, it's a little bit frustrating that I have to do this thing again, but to recognize it, that's part of what Kohelet's trying to get us to do, is to look at life honestly and to recognize, not to be like, oh no, everything's wonderful, I love my life, I love that I have to clean up the dog poop again, it's fabulous. No, do you recognize that there's some stuff in life that you're like, no, I just got to do it. But to recognize that maybe it doesn't have any lasting impact on, the day, but if I didn't clean up the dog poop, the yard would not look good, right? And even those small things, what do they change? They change me. They change me as a person. They change me into somebody who is able to go through the monotonous tasks and who can, as Colossians talks about, be a service to the Lord. And so we have lots of opportunities to turn those small things into a ripple for eternity. Hike your own hike. For those of you who weren't here, that's my code word for homework this time. So this is not homework, it's hike your own hike. You get to do what you want. So the chapter 1 checkpoint is available for you. I'll do the same thing next week. I'll say, hey, what's something that stood out to you from the checkpoint? And then the hit the trail is the application questions from chapter 1. Now, if you already dove into those application questions, fabulous. That's wonderful. And then chapter 2 is the map it out, which is looking at the passage itself. So we're covering chapter 2 next week. If you so desire, you can take a look at that. Thank you guys so much for coming. And if you didn't grab a book, if you want a book, the book's there. If you didn't grab the handout for chapter 2, grab the handout for chapter 2. Run like you stole it. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.